Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Deku and Death. This will be Part 49, Chapter 49, entitled Some Sunny Day. Midoriya swallowed hard, the noises of the world around him fading out until he could hear only his heartbeat in his ears. But as he felt his Adam's apple press against the hand Shigaraki had wrapped around his throat, he instantly froze, spit and bile nearly returning back up in a reflexive cough. He pushed it down. He pushed it all back down, afraid of what even the tiniest movement or sound would cost. He'd managed to bring his hands together by his stomach, hyper-focused on the tiny inching progress he was making. He just needed to get one off. Just one bare fingertip was all he needed. He slipped one finger under his other glove. He'd deal with the aftermath later. He'd think about the consequences later. But right now, all that was standing between him and the forever nightmare that was Shigaraki was one measly little glove. Shigaraki cocked his head, huffing in disappointment, and with a lazy yet firm force, he pushed Midoriya's hands back down. "There's no need for that." Midoriya looked back at him through the corner of his eye, afraid to even turn his head, and watched as the smug smirk on his face dropped in a contemptful glare. Shigaraki glanced back down at the teen's hands, at his gloves, now shaking slightly at his sides. "Those must be nice," he hummed. "If you're reaching to take those off, then you must not be able to use your quirk with them on." It took every ounce of innate self-control to not snap his head up as his eyes moved the same, staring straight at Gami, who had almost certainly growled, even to his overwhelmed ears. Midoriya stared straight ahead, wide doe eyes watching the nonchalant man he knew morph into someone spiteful and animalistic, someone he didn't recognize. And he could only plead through his helpless gaze that Gami wouldn't do anything thoughtless as he approached ever closer. "You're lucky." Gami stopped, something deep in his soul burning in such an anguish that it charred the fog from his mind, leaving him just moments from reaching for Midoriya's gloves himself, despite the watchful eyes upon them and the hand on the boy's throat. Gami knew he did not have a heart, but something in his chest stuttered as he realized what he'd nearly done. Shigaraki's eyes followed every terrified twitch and quake of Midoriya's hands. "With those, you must never have to worry about your quirk hurting anyone." Just before this moment, Midoriya had loved the thoughtlessness of doing basic tasks normally, without the fear of his decay acting on its own. Now, he'd never felt so desperate to never have had them on. Raspy wheezes of what haunted his mind to register as Shigaraki's laughter filled his head, laughter that cracked and echoed like the crumblings of a canyon. A shudder ran through him, goosebumps chasing down his spine, and as the depressive laughter died down, the hand around his throat squeezed tighter, enough for Midoriya to choke on his own breath. "Those are going to stay on, right?" Midoriya couldn't find the gall to speak. He couldn't even part his lips, his teeth clenched together, terrified of what might escape him. He wasn't even sure he could if he wanted, everything in his throat dammed by the hand that wrung out his flesh like a wet towel. "I want to hear that heroic little facade of yours break." He met Gami's eyes again. The ghost was flickering, waves of his own missing body rolling off of him like he was disintegrating, and still Gami tore at his own robes, threatening to rip himself apart as he seemed to fight something inside of him. "Damn it, Izuku just—" Gami hunched over, gripping at his hood as he fought to suppress the scream at the edge of his mouth. "Fuck! What do I do? What the hell do I do?" Midoriya didn't know, but the tears climbing up his throat were forced back down as Shigaraki squeezed his flesh again in reminder. He lowered his hands to his sides, still tense and shaking, and hoped that would be enough for him to be allowed to breathe again. "Good. See, that wasn't that hard." Shigaraki loosened his grip, leaning into Midoriya's stature as he rested the arm still holding him hostage around his shoulders. "Just act natural. We're old friends. That's right. Nothing else." Still he frowned, watching Midoriya's labored, shaky breath continue. "Just calm down. We don't want to make a racket in the middle of this crowd, now do we? I just want to have a little chat, that's it, all right?" Midoriya couldn't believe a single word he said, not with the hand wrapped precariously around his neck. His eyes darted around frantically, searching for anything, anyone, that could help him. But none of the countless distracted passerby even noticed him, much less his current peril. And even if someone did, what could they do? He was the hero in training, and he was helpless, paralyzed like a child. Shigaraki sighed despondently, feeling the boy's rapid pulse between his fingers. "Hey, what did I just say?" he hissed into Midoriya's ear, dusty blue hair tickling his cheek. "If you show even the slightest odd behavior, well, you know how my quirk works." Midoriya's breath hitched, pressing his eyes shut, trying to convince his terrified mind that this was all just a scary dream, that if he pushed hard enough, he'd wake up soon. In his own thoughts, he missed the way Shigaraki peered down at his wrist, at the scar peeking out from underneath his glove. He missed the way the mark almost seemed to light up the villain's gaze. He missed the way he smiled. Perhaps it was for the better. Maybe he didn't need to see it. He missed it. Gami did not. Something inside the ghost screamed, something ugly and rageful. Something screamed at him to knock Shigaraki to the floor, to wrap his own skeletal hands around his throat until he could feel the warmth of raw flesh and blood between his fingers once again. Something screamed at him to carve his way into his face until the pressure of his thumbs dug out Shigaraki's eyes for looking, and the sharpness of his fingertips pried out Shigaraki's teeth for smiling. Someone screamed at him for allowing what was his to be taken from him. Someone screamed at him to take back what was his, no matter the cost. Gami stepped away, afraid of who his thoughts truly belonged to. "Though, I guess that's not as much of a threat as I'd like it to be," Shigaraki hummed in disappointment. "I guess you can't really fear death once you stop dying." Midoriya forgot how to breathe, as all his body's strength diverted to force his eyes open instead. He felt the blood rush from his face, looking straight at Gami, who only shared his same stare. Shakily, through the silence, his eyes shifted to catch Shigaraki in his peripherals, but all he could see was that damn fucking smile. "Surprised?" He cocked his head coyly, chuckling at his own words. "I was, but it made sense considering how long you lasted against my Nomu at USJ." Midoriya couldn't even process what was being said, his mind struggling to catch up from before, his thoughts and emotions jumbled like a shaken jar. What? How did he? "Why do you keep going when no one's here to save you?" "Sensei seems to know so much about you. I'm almost a bit jealous." Shigaraki shook his head playfully, relishing in the fear practically rolling off the boy in waves. "I thought something like immortality would intrigue Sensei more, but I guess there's really no point if he can't take it for himself." He clicked his teeth. "It's a shame, but you and your quirk are pretty special. Things would be no fun if it ended that quickly." How did he know? How did he know so much? They'd been so careful, hell, even less people knew about his quirk status. How the hell did Shigaraki find out? Just who the hell was Sensei? Gami shared a terrified look with his successor. I don't know. He clutched his head, feeling the something from before start to reel away. He didn't let him. "What did you do? How does he know?" Midoriya couldn't help his flinch. Gami knew this wasn't his fault, right? There was no way in hell that Shigaraki or his sensei had learned any of this from him, right? Shigaraki smiled, feeding off the reactions he was pulling from the boy like a leech. "I know my threat." He squeezed Midoriya's throat again. "Probably doesn't mean much to someone like you. So I'll give you another ultimatum." He lowered his head, and Midoriya cringed away as he felt hot breath, that damn smile, around his ear. "If you try to do anything, I'll kill you. And then, on my way out, I'll kill as many people as I pass." The screams he'd heard before suddenly replayed again in his head like a broken record, all scratched and warped as he understood just who he had to stop. "And sure, a hero might come along and catch me." Shigaraki shrugged dismissively, leaning in just inches away from Midoriya's face, his grinning teeth almost close enough to carve the smile permanently into his face. "But when you wake up with 20, no, 30 bodies lying around you, you'll know it's all your fault." That hot, itchy feeling he knew all too well began spreading over his skin, and his eyes darted around his skull, desperately trying to see his throat, to assure his stuttering heartbeat that he was still intact. There was an awful buzzing from the back of his thoughts, an overwhelming cacophony of the blended mall sounds laced with wailing that haunted him like the wind. Gami could only beg into Midoriya's petrified gaze. "Please, please just run or fight. Please do something." Midoriya could only stare helplessly back. How could he? Any seasoned hero would have called his bluff. There was no way such an egotistical, self-centered villain would let himself get captured like that simply for spite. Any seasoned hero would have. And then would have been made to watch as countless innocent lives were caught in the crossfire, all as their own life faded away from them just as suddenly. Midoriya knew. He didn't have to know Shigaraki personally or know anything of his destructive tendencies. He knew just how much weight Shigaraki held behind those words. In some other universe, however, he would have had no idea, and seeing as his earlier vision was the only thing giving him enough self-restraint not to succumb to his instincts screaming at him to get as far away from Shigaraki as possible, that thought truly terrified him. What would he have done then? "Why do you keep going when no one's here to save you?" He swallowed thickly, forcing back the tears budding at the corners of his eyes. It did nothing to stop the quiver in his lip, though. "What do you want to talk about?" Shigaraki laughed, a breathy, relieved laugh laced with excitement. The very sound of it nearly made Midoriya puke. "That's the spirit." The villain glanced around, keeping his hair casted over his eyes. "You know, since you're being such a good sport, let's take a seat," Shigaraki proposed, void of any room for argument. "Then we can talk more comfortably. Relaxed." Midoriya's feet stuttered into action as Shigaraki began to guide him deeper into the crowd, his hand still wrapped firmly around his throat. He tried not to lag behind, desperate to avoid the cruel reminder of his leash. His stomach churned from humiliation, all of his inhuman abilities, and all it took was one fucking man to make him feel utterly helpless. One man that could have been him in some cruel twist of fate. One man that held up the mirror and reminded him how much he feared himself. Shigaraki led him to the center court of the mall, finally choosing to sit comfortably near some foliage, pulling the boy down beside him. Midoriya couldn't bring himself to look up, afraid to see all the innocent passerby going about their day, unknowingly, dangerously close to two people who could possibly end their lives with one unfortunate move. Gami could only wonder when he had become such a bystander, as the something inside of him mocked him for it. "To tell you the truth," Shigaraki began with a sigh, "I hate mostly everything, but the number one thing that's pissing me off right now is—" A sharp buzz came from between them, and Midoriya's blood ran cold as he felt it right up his pant leg. His eyes instinctively snapped down to his pocket, thoughts frozen in time, heartbeat pounding in his ears. Curiously, yet not devoid of his sly, conniving smirk, Shigaraki reached his free hand over, slithering Midoriya's phone out of his pant pocket and into his grasp with the repulsiveness of the plague itself. Midoriya felt his heart stop as the corner of his eye caught the crudely edited picture of Uraraka that he'd cut from one of their selfies together and used as her contact photo. Directly beside it, even in the small print, his hyper-focused, beady eyes managed to scan the text on the screen. "Hey, where are you at? I can't find you." His heart then started back up with a sharp pang as Shigaraki's own breath hitched. "Huh," he drawled, his gleeful expression finally dropping into something scarily serious. "I didn't realize you had company." Midoriya's gaze scraped to his side with the weight of the world raking through the earth, loud and heavy like the scratch of metal. His eyes were as they'd been since the beginning, wide and petrified, though now they shook with the hardened experience of terror from the gaze of an expert. "Maybe we'll have to move somewhere more private. I'd hate for us to get interrupted." "No!" Gami jumped out, just a stretch away from instinctively ripping Midoriya out of Shigaraki's grip, before he managed to catch himself, digging his hands into the fabric of his robe instead, pulling the clothing into strips of mist with sheer force alone. No, you can't let him move you to another location. What if there's a portal? I can't follow you through. Gami scraped the tips of his bony fingers into his hood. Fuck, what do I do? What do I do? The ghost's franticness bled into the air as he swiveled in every direction, trying to find something, anything, that could salvage the rapidly devolving situation. And Midoriya knew it wasn't his mentor's intention, but he didn't have much more strength left to keep his tears inside as the hopelessness of his reality started to crash down on him. Gami finally landed on his successor's phone, which was still managing to hold most of Shigaraki's sour attention, when his core lurched hard like a sinking anchor. She's here. They're all here. He fought against the weight rooting him in place, against the possessiveness of his soul that tethered him. He pulled and pulled and pulled from the binding feeling until he felt something snap. I'm going. You can't let him move you. I'm going to get help. You have to be here when I come back. You can't let him. You have to be here. Midoriya could not respond, and even if he could, he knew he could not convince Gami otherwise. Midoriya could not respond, but in his eyes he begged. He begged desperately for Gami to remember just what was at risk, and just what he was risking. He begged in the only way he helplessly could, before surrendering completely, like he had a choice to begin with. No, we don't have to do that. It's fine, Midoriya stuttered. I can tell her I'm at the other side of the mall. She'll go there. She'll be busy. We can stay where we are. Shigaraki pondered the option for a moment, tapping a finger on his cheek. But he did little to hide the satisfied, self-centered grin blooming on his face. He then handed Midoriya his phone back. I think I like that idea. Just don't forget what will happen if you try anything else. Midoriya choked as his breath was momentarily cut off. He nodded hastily, taking his phone in his trembling hands as he struggled to get his fingers to move the way he wanted them to. Opening his messages, he paused for just a moment, not even a second, and glanced upwards out of the tops of his eyes. For the first time in his afterlife, Gami found himself genuinely hoping the universe still knew mercy as he sped off in a desperately morbid scavenger hunt. Midoriya felt the air warm a little, losing the undead chill that hung around him, but he didn't dare look up again, afraid to lose what little nerve he still had left. Slowly, he typed, trying to force the fraudulence of his words through to his eyes. Hey, sorry, I got lost trying to find you guys. I'm back by the entrance if you want to meet me there. Uraraka responded almost immediately. Of course, I'll come get you. Ida's too busy trying on shoes with Kaminari and Ashido. Midoriya nearly dropped his phone. Shit, he didn't want Shigaraki to know more of his friends were here. It was bad enough he was aware of Uraraka's presence. He might get spooked, and then he might want to move. And that was bad. That was really, really bad. His gaze turned shakily to the side, catching Shigaraki's eyes, rereading the text. Huh, he muttered. So there's more of you brats here. You can't let him. You have to be here. They don't care about me, Midoriya hastily supplied, the desperation in his voice bleeding out like an open wound. If they did, they would be trying to find me, and she's the only one who is, and she's going the opposite way. She's busy. They're all busy. The silence that followed easily suffocated him, more than the hand on his throat ever could. Wordlessly, Shigaraki plucked the phone from his trembling fingers and carelessly tossed it behind him into the foliage they were sitting in front of. Every nerve in Midoriya's body tensed over. This was it. If Shigaraki tried to move him, then the minute they got outside of the mall, Midoriya would make him regret thinking he ever could. He owed Gami that much if he was going to fail him so quickly. Midoriya steeled over when Shigaraki moved, instincts roaring in the back of his mind. But instead, the villain leaned back, the grip on Midoriya's throat relaxing ever so slightly. Anyway, what was I saying? Shigaraki mumbled. Oh yeah, the hero killer. He's really pissing me off. Midoriya had to fight to keep his relief from erupting out of his throat, feeling something groan in his chest as he pushed it all back down, bellowing under its weight. He noticed Shigaraki waiting for him to speak and quickly shifted gears. He could do this. All he had to do was stall, just long enough for Gami to come back with help. It wasn't hopeless yet. Why do you keep going when no one's here to save you? Not yet. I thought he was with you guys. Shigaraki sighed disappointedly. I thought you were more observant than that. Midoriya was, so he stayed silent and allowed Shigaraki to repeat information he already knew. The villain shook his head. I never agreed to him joining the League, but he's one of us according to society. Midoriya wasn't prepared for the sudden growl that escaped Shigaraki's throat, causing him to subconsciously flinch back into the hand around his own. And that's the problem. Everyone seems to be going crazy over the hero killer. Well, Midoriya couldn't necessarily disagree, considering even his own classmates couldn't hold back their opinions on the villain despite knowing how close 3 of their own had come to death at his hands. I don't know if it was his single-track mind or tenacity or whatever, but didn't you guys think he was kind of cool? He fought the shiver that ran down his spine. I don't understand what makes him so different from me. We were both just destroying what we didn't want to see. Shigaraki's expression shifted into something more somber, a thoughtful look, as he considered his own words. But there was something about seeing such a calm face on such an unstable man that scared Midoriya far worse than anything so far. But if society already thinks of us as one and the same, then why does everyone keep looking at him, and not my UA invasion or my Nomus? Why is no one looking at me? Midoriya tried to ignore the sound of clear envy that seeped through his teeth. Shigaraki leaned in, pulling Midoriya closer where the hiss of his hot breath could reach his skin again. So, what do you think the difference between the two of us is? And despite the heat crawling against his skin, Midoriya could feel nothing but ice in his veins. Even if he wanted to speak, he found the words caught in his throat, stuck beneath the hand threatening to choke him out. What was he supposed to say to a psychotic lunatic who was barely a move away from murdering him and countless passerby? The truth? Would that even help? Would lying be any better? He sucked in a sharp breath, ignoring the sweat beads rolling down his face, trying to focus his eyes before he lost them permanently to disassociation. I'm going to get help. You have to be here when I get back. He parted his lips, nearly coughing in how dry his mouth was. While I could never understand nor accept you, I can at least understand the hero killer. He stopped thinking. He stopped listening to all the millions of ways that this could go wrong, according to his brain, even if they were all right. He simply opened his mouth and let all of his words tumble out slow and unfiltered, winding and adrift. The hero killer and I. We both started out by watching All Might, and then striving to recreate what he stood for. It was odd to hear himself accredit so much of his own drive to All Might, even if they were both on better terms now. But despite any personal bias, it was the furthest thing from a lie. He'd watched countless videos, read countless articles, dug up every single scrap he could about the hero, because he knew in everything he found, All Might would always stay the same, a permanent pillar of hope, a reminder that the sun would always rise again. I want people to know that I'll fight forever for that ending, if I have to. It was no mistake where Midoriya had come from. I can't accept the hero killer because I can't accept the fact that he chose to judge and destroy those who didn't fit All Might's legacy, rather than carrying it himself. That's where we're different. Midoriya's eyes flashed back to that night. But I do understand why he did the things he did. Still, with you, there was the potential of a true hero. And it was no mistake who Midoriya had almost turned out to be. Because we both fundamentally believe that heroes should fight to protect and save without a second thought, no matter the consequences. Heroes are the ones who correct all that unfairness. Midoriya, trapped in his own mess of swirling thoughts and unwanted memories, did not notice the slow turn of Shigaraki's head towards him. Back then, Midoriya pulled them both back to that night. When the hero killer saved me, he showed me that he didn't destroy just because he could, or even because he wanted to. And because the hero killer didn't give up so thickly. There was a certain charge behind those words. Shigaraki did not miss it. He showed me that he was firm in what he believed in. He is a true hero in this society overrun by fakes. I won't allow a childish lowlife like you to taint the change he will bring to the world. Midoriya looked down for a moment, his eyes catching the faded scar on his leg from the bite of the hero killer's merciless blade. and for that same moment, all the blood and fear came rushing back, pounding in his ears, and reminded him just how different they truly were. And while I can acknowledge that the hero killer's methods were wrong, he tried to live according to his set of ideals, and I, as well as other people, can understand that. Midoriya found himself feeling strangely balanced, almost as if a piece of himself could finally rest after that night. That night would never go away. He would never forget it. But maybe he could finally lay it to rest with all the other ungodly horrors that haunted his sleep. It was almost funny. Shigaraki had been the one to come with questions, but it would be Midoriya who left with answers. Noting the prolonged silence, Midoriya turned to eye the man holding him hostage. Immediately, any calm or balanced feeling left him as two piercing red eyes stared right back at him. An overwhelming sense of dread filled the air between them as every instinct in Midoriya's blood screamed at him to run, to get as far away from the man as he could. But he could not, the two silently and continually staring into each other like they could see through. Though Midoriya couldn't move due to the paralyzing fear that anchored his bones, Shigaraki had none. Yet, the villain still stared into him, past his eyes and his skin, past his blood and his bones, past even his heart and his soul, through to something of which Midoriya did not know. Then, the hand around his throat wrapped just a bit tighter. My head feels clearer now, like a bunch of dots finally connected. Shigaraki began to laugh quietly, this sickening, heavy chuckle, like a raspy hyena cackle. I feel like I get it now. Midoriya thought he was crying, until he realized the excessive amounts of sweat running down his face. Why the hero killer pisses me off. He tried to squirm away, trying to put some distance between them, but Shigaraki clamped down hard on his throat, digging his 4 fingers into the flesh. Midoriya tried hard not to think about the way the scar on his wrist throbbed. He did not succeed. It's all about... Shigaraki turned his head to face Midoriya fully, and slowly, his expression morphed into that of something inhuman. His eyes squinted against his skull, pushing every crack of dry skin against his cheeks. His mouth stretched into a hideous smile, skin folding like a grotesque caricature, to resemble the battered face of a corpse. All Might. Midoriya's heart didn't even have the chance to skip a beat. Of course, he reaffirmed, nodding to himself. It would all lead back to him in the end. Can't believe I didn't realize it before. The reason the world lives in so much peace is because of him, too. Shigaraki suddenly leaned back, pulling an unprepared Midoriya far too close to continue pretending to be comfortable. His instincts flared, like a deer caught in a bear trap, and he tried to recoil away, but the bear trap held, and he just as quickly choked on his own breath as Shigaraki squeezed his throat tighter than he'd done so far, threatening to pop his Adam's apple practically through his skin. People are so desperate to believe in a hero that will always protect them, that will always keep them safe, when in reality, that doesn't exist. Midoriya's hands twitched at his sides as he desperately tried to keep them there, desperately fighting the natural reaction to rip away the threat to his immortal life, desperately trying to maintain the facade that everything was all right. But Shigaraki squeezed particularly hard, and nothing he could muster up would stop his body from trying to alleviate the pressure at his throat, whether it was truly life-threatening or otherwise. People latch on to All Might like he's the perfect idea of a hero. Shigaraki was growing manic. Like there wasn't anybody he couldn't save, but he's just selling a lie, and people like the hero killer, and you just keep it going. Shigaraki eagerly turned his full attention to Midoriya. The boy's eyes were welded shut, the edges brimming with tears he was so desperately trying to press away. He had finally started to try to fight back against him, his gloved hands frantically tugging at Shigaraki's fingers, trying to grant himself some reprieve to his airflow, all to no real avail. And the sounds he was making, oh, the sounds, there was something about the small little gasps that escaped his lips like a leaky pipe, like the whimpers of a beaten animal, like the helpless little child he was always meant to be, that sent Shigaraki into a frenzy. Shigaraki watched his eyes pop open, probably wondering why he'd stopped talking all of a sudden, only to find the villain staring right into him, and the fear that flooded his vision, the pure, unrestrained terror that nearly made him drop the fifth finger. "I hope you can explain it to me." And he didn't even have to imagine the scream. "I get why you confuse me now." Shigaraki shook his head, but he couldn't shake the smile from his hollow cheeks. "It's all so simple." The villain lurched his head back, echoing the motions of a deep, guttural laugh that got stuck somewhere in his gut. "You're just like me. You should understand everything I'm saying about how this world is cruel and fake and throws people like us away like trash. You should hate this world. You should hate everything in it." Shigaraki considered himself very lucky that he didn't miss the first tear of their encounter, getting to catch it roll down the boy's cheek. "I'm more resilient than you think." He laughed to himself. He wasn't ready to snuff out that little fire just yet. "But All Might sold you a lie, and you bought it," he mocked. "And now you're just trying to continue a legacy, as if the truth it masks wasn't the reason why you suffered to begin with." Midoriya did not acknowledge the weakness that had escaped him, not even as it dried up at his chin. He scrunched his eyes in shame and devoted what little resistance he had left to make sure it would not escape again. "I'm so glad we were able to chat. This is great." Shigaraki bubbled with animation. "I finally understand now. Thank you, Midoriya." The villain closed his hand even tighter, relishing the way his fingers sank into Midoriya's skin, drinking up the choked gag that erupted from his pursed mouth like a man stranded in the desert. The boy tried to struggle. Of course he tried to struggle. That was the best part, and he used it as an excuse to dig in deeper, watching his wide doe eyes nearly pop out of his skull. Somehow, through the rush of adrenaline, Midoriya had managed to pry some of his fingers between Shigaraki's hand and his throat, managing to grant himself a tiny sliver of air. Shigaraki allowed him to breathe, before yanking him closer, where he could drop his voice down. "Did you forget what we agreed?" he hissed out in a raspy, excited whisper. "I thought you were trying to avoid all these people dying. What did I say? 30? Shigaraki cackled. "I could do more than that. I wouldn't even have to decay them all the way. Just one touch, and they'd be on the floor, half their heads missing, brain matter oozing everywhere." Midoriya let go instantly, giving up on his fight. "That's what I thought." He loosened his grip, but made sure to give one last painful squeeze, just because he could. "It's so easy to manipulate you when you force yourself down a path of selflessness. All I have to do is threaten someone else, and I can get you to do whatever I want." His laughter had dimmed to a low chuckle, scraping his thumb up and down the top of Midoriya's spine, counting every single one of the boy's helpless tremors. "It's so ironic that all I needed was a creed, a set of ideals," Shigaraki scoffed. "I can do that." "All your nonsense about a conviction, just shut up already." It had been all right in front of him, he just hadn't put the pieces together. What a shame. But in the end, he quite liked this turn of events. He wouldn't have wanted it to go any other way. "Sure, the hero killer may have the fame and attention for now, but he gave away all his secrets to me." If only Shigaraki could see him one last time, to flaunt his prideful sneer at him from the outside of his cell bars. "He is a true hero in this society overrun by fakes." He was a fool, a complete and utter fool, who'd landed right where his foolishness had led him. There were no true heroes in this world. What a stupid thought, but clearly it was a thought that far too many stupid people clung on to. That they would always be protected from the evils that lurked in the shadows. But Shigaraki was here, out in the daylight, defying that very thought, and yet no one around them in their ignorance could ever believe otherwise. "Everyone will finally understand when I show them that there's no world where everyone is safe. No hero can promise them that." He would remind them how dangerous this world truly was. Midoriya didn't dare move as Shigaraki turned back to him, not even as his rabbit heart threatened to burst from his chest. "You've been such a great help, Midoriya. If only there was something I could do in return." A selfish sliver of bravery in him wanted to tell the villain to leave, to let him go, turn around and get out, that he'd done enough, that he could go. that if he wanted to return the favor, he'd leave Midoriya to catch his breath. But Midoriya didn't feel brave. Really, he couldn't remember the last time he truly felt brave, rather than just walking through the motions. Oh, I know. He didn't like the way Shigaraki perked up. He especially didn't like the way that disgusting, hollowed-out smile returned to his face. I'll take you back to the base. Of course, of course. There's some others I'd love for you to meet. His face deepened into a sinister grin. And Sensei would love to finally meet you. I'll just take him to Sensei. He'll know what to do. Yeah, Midoriya wasn't brave. He was a fucking coward. He struggled hard in Shigaraki's grasp, immediately forgetting why he wasn't trying to struggle in the first place. No! But I see you have something I want. How thoughtful of you. I don't. Shigaraki pulled him in tightly, muffling his frantic movements. Oh, come on. You'll love it there. And surely you haven't forgotten. The villain suddenly cut off his airflow. Midoriya knew it wasn't a threat to him. Midoriya glanced around desperately. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be fucking happening. He didn't want anyone to die, but goddammit, he couldn't go with him. I'm going. You can't let him move you. He was trying. He was trying. Goddammit, he'd been trying for so fucking long. He'd been doing nothing but stalling, nothing but dragging out this nightmare for as long as he possibly could. He couldn't do it by himself anymore. He needed help. Fuck, somebody help him. I'm going to get help. You have to be here when I get back. He'd promised. He'd promised. Shigaraki shuffled around in his pockets, getting ready to leave, getting ready to take Midoriya with him. You can't let him. You have to be here. A tear slipped out of the corner of his eye. Please, please, where are you? Midori? They were both surprised by the voice, looking up to see a small brunette with wide eyes. Only Midoriya could see the tall, dominating shadow behind her. Uraraka cocked her head in confusion, her slow steps towards them coming to a halt as her eyes swept over them both. He's not a friend of yours, is he? Midoriya stared at her with wide eyes of his own, filled with terror and tears, clenching his teeth together as Shigaraki squeezed particularly hard on his throat, threatening to pop him like a balloon. Her expression morphed into petrified terror. Let go of him! Shigaraki had not said a word, but a tense Midoriya did not miss the way his free hand started to emerge from his hoodie pocket. It all rushed back to him. It's only fair. After all, you damaged my Nomu the same way. I hope you can explain it to me. I want to hear that heroic little facade of yours break. It's nothing. I'm fine, he pleaded, ignoring the hand at his throat, the tears in his eyes, the fear in his blood. So don't come any closer. There were few moments where the world stood completely still, and though the same bustle of strangers moved around them, the same aimless chattering waved through their ears, the same countless lives stepped in and out of harm, nobody in Midoriya's small little world could dare move a muscle. Not Midoriya, caught in a bear trap on borrowed time. Not Uraraka, now trapped herself, hopelessly trying to rescue her friend. Not Gami, pitifully realizing he may have just doomed them all. Not Shigaraki, until he narrowed his eyes disappointedly towards Midoriya from his peripherals. Not Shigaraki, until he suddenly released Midoriya from his grasp, waving both his hands out as he threw a sheepish smile onto his face. My bad, he apologized lightly. I didn't realize he had company. There was a certain charge behind those words. Midoriya did not miss it. Right then, see ya, Shigaraki sighed, standing up from his seat. And you know what'll happen if you try giving chase, right? Midoriya elected not to respond, still trying to control his intense coughing from the air being returned to his lungs just as quickly as it was deprived. He'd wrapped his own hand around his throat to give himself enough support to crane his head up, wincing at the awful feeling of pressure there again. He cracked his watery eyes open, catching the fleeting sight of Shigaraki beginning to disappear into the crowd, as Uraraka quickly ran over to take his place. Wait! The voice that came out of Midoriya's mouth did not sound like him, but rather his garbled, mangled corpse. The air around them rapidly dropped in temperature. Shigaraki! The man stopped walking, allowing Midoriya the chance to catch his breath. Midoriya did not need to see his face to feel the smug smile radiating off of him. Uraraka whipped her head towards the retreating man, her mouth dropping, the full situation finally processing. Huh? Did you say... How does your sensei know about me? Shigaraki did not turn back around to face him, simply shrugging his shoulders. I don't know, he replied lamely. Maybe one day you'll get to ask him yourself. Midoriya decidedly did not like that answer. But for now, you should focus on taking care of yourself for the next time we meet. I'd love for us to chat longer. And with that, Shigaraki slowly sank into the crowd, disappearing amongst the countless strangers all passing through, until no one could see him anymore. Midoriya suddenly collapsed in on himself, coughing violently from the overstrain on his voice. He rested his whole upper torso on his knees, finally feeling the last little bit of strength he was trying to hold on to pitifully fade away. His fingers reached for his neck, but he unconsciously flinched away at the sensation, destructively caught between the raw nerve that had newly been exposed and the instinctual desire to confirm that all of himself was still intact. Uraraka had her eyes locked hysterically on the bustling mall crowd in front of them, before her attention was stolen away by Midoriya's clear wince. She crouched down, frantically checking him over for any obvious injuries. I was heading over to the entrance to come find you, but it just felt like something was pulling me this way instead. I don't know. I'm so sorry. I should have gotten here sooner. Uraraka, he pushed out his raspy voice. Call the police. Please, call the police. She nodded firmly, standing back up. Yeah, right. Midoriya curled back up, returning his hands to the base of his neck, where he found he could comfortably place them. He could see Uraraka out of the corner of his eye, stepped off to the side, frantically speaking into her phone, refusing to let him out of her sight again. But even still, Midoriya could not relax, his eyes continuously darting amongst the passing crowds, afraid to see him reemerge. He was not safe. He would never be safe again. Cold and helpless and small, he looked up at Gami, who had still not moved from arriving back to Midoriya, who had not spoken a word, even upon Shigaraki's departure. He floated unnaturally far, unnaturally distant, when all Midoriya wanted right now was to curl up against the warmth of his tattered robes and reassurances. He moved one hand to reach out slightly, trying to call the ghost over when his voice could not, only able to mouth out the words to a slightly less painful degree. Gami did not respond. He didn't even react. He simply stared out into oblivion, his body shedding far more mist and fog than Midoriya had ever seen him produce. Midoriya winced again, bringing his arm back to his trembling form. Damn it! Why was it so fucking cold? Hearing Uraraka's voice, his eyes perked up in that direction. Watching her talk to a couple of concerned passerby that had noticed her unease, still on the phone with the police, she begged them for help. Please, call a hero. Get outside and call Eraserhead. Midoriya shifted, craning his back so that he could reach into the foliage behind him. He kept one hand near his throat, but used the other to aimlessly dig around in the dirt. Where was it? Damn it, where? His gloved hand wrapped around something smooth and squarish, and he hurriedly yanked it back into his lap, specks of dirt and all. His phone turned on without any hassle, thankfully, not that Midoriya expected it to be broken, though with his luck, he could never be too sure. He clicked through his contacts until he found who he was looking for, and with a quick breath that nearly reignited his coughing fit, he pressed the call button. His phone didn't even ring twice. Well, that was quick. Aizawa's voice echoed softly over the speaker. Do you need me to come pick you up? Sensei. The phone went silent. Shigaraki. He was here. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 49 of Deku in Death. I hope you all are enjoying this one. I thought personally, one of my biggest likes about this fic is the way that the author writes, the descriptiveness, the detail. Like it's like you're there in the entire scene itself, right? So all of the little nuances, the changing in POVs between Shigaraki and Izuku in this chapter, right? The stuff that's going on in the background with Gami, and just the entirety of it. You feel like you're there. So this is really well done. I re-fall in love with this fic every time I read it. So please, 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 if you have an opportunity to support the author, to leave comments and kudos on their fic, I always have the links to the fics in the descriptions for you guys to jump back and throw that support there. This fic is still ongoing at this point that I'm posting this, with over 500,000 words. So it's the longest fic that I have ever done at this point. Let me know your overall thoughts and reactions, though. Drop your comments below. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.